My son-in-law pointed his phone at me across the Thanksgiving table and laughed. Not the kind of laugh that fills a room with warmth, the kind that empties it. He had been live on his channel for 11 minutes, and I found out later there were 43,000 people watching when he zoomed in on my hands. I did not know it was happening. I was just reaching for the gravy boat. "Look at those mitts," Derek said, tilting the phone so his audience could get a better angle. 65 years old and he still dresses like he is going to change a tire. "Pa, what is that?" "A JCPenney special from 1987. My daughter Melissa laughed from across the table. It was not her real laugh. Her real laugh sounds like her mother's. This was the other one, the performance laugh she uses when she needs Derek to feel clever. I looked at my hands. They are scarred and thick from 31 years behind the wheel, and 20 more running the dispatch floor of the freight company I built from nothing. I drove the first truck myself. I loaded the first trailer myself. I sweated through every summer and white-knuckled every winter on every interstate between Dallas and Denver. These hands bought Melissa her first car. They signed the check for her college tuition. They carried her mother's casket 8 years ago when she passed. I set the gravy boat back down without pouring any. I looked at Derek. He was still recording, his grin wide and white, the phone angled up like he was interviewing a carnival act. He had put a label on the screen. I could see the reflection of it in the window behind him. It said Boomer Thanksgiving with a turkey emoji. His followers were commenting in real time. I could see the numbers ticking up. I could see the laughing faces stacking in the corner of the screen. I am a patient man. 30 years of long haul taught me patience. You cannot hurry a highway. You cannot bully a storm front. You wait, you read the road, and you move when the moment is right. So I said nothing. I picked up my fork. I ate my turkey dry. But I did not forget. I never forget. What you need to understand about Derek is that he has never finished anything in his life. He dropped out of business school after 1 semester. He quit 3 sales jobs in 4 years. He started a podcast that lasted 6 episodes, a fitness brand that lasted 2 months, and a dropshipping store that he abandoned before he ever mailed a single package. The only thing Derek ever successfully built was an audience of people who liked to watch other people fail. His channel had grown to about 50,000 subscribers by monetizing what he called real-life content, which meant filming his family without asking, filming strangers without asking, filming whatever embarrassed someone who could not fight back against the internet. He had moved into my daughter's life 7 years ago, and into my house 3 years after that. My house, the 4-bedroom ranch outside Fort Worth that I paid off 20 years ago. Melissa had called me, crying one night, said their apartment lease was up and they were between things. Between things. I told them it was temporary. They treated it like a deed. I had given them the master bedroom because it was bigger and Melissa had trouble sleeping. I moved my things into the guest room and told myself it was just for a few months. Those months became seasons. The seasons became years. Somewhere in that time, Derek started referring to it as our place when he talked to his followers. He never corrected the assumption. My daughter never corrected him either. Thanksgiving was the day I finally understood why. After dinner, after Derek had turned off his phone and gone to watch football and Melissa had disappeared upstairs, I sat alone at the kitchen table. I am an early riser and a late sitter. I have always done my best thinking at a table with cold coffee. I was thinking about the gravy boat. I was thinking about the way Melissa laughed. I was thinking about the way Derek had not looked at me once while he was filming. He had looked at the screen. He had looked at his audience. I was just furniture in my own dining room. I got up and walked to the study, which used to be my study but was now mostly Derek's workspace. He had his equipment in there, his ring lights, his microphone stand, his green screen rolled up in the corner. I had not been in that room in months because every time I opened the door, he made me feel like I was interrupting something important. I sat at the desk. The monitor was in sleep mode. I touched the mouse. I want to be clear that I was not snooping. I was looking for a pen and a notepad because I still write things down on paper the old way. But the screen came up showing Derek's email because he had not logged out. And right there at the top of the inbox was a message from a name I recognized. The name was Patterson Logistics. They were one of my competitors, mid-size freight operation out of Amarillo. We had been circling the same contracts for 15 years. The subject line said, Confidentiality Agreement, Final Draft. I did not click it. I did not need to, because sitting right next to the keyboard was a manila folder, and the tab on the folder said Roy's Business. Documents. Roy is my name. I opened the folder with the same feeling I used to get when I saw black ice on the highway at night. You know what it is before your brain fully processes it. Your body understands before your mind catches up. My hands were steady. That is training. 30 years of keeping your hands steady when everything around you is trying to go sideways. Inside the folder was a copy of my company's current line of credit agreement. There were withdrawal slips. There were wire transfer records. There were emails I was not supposed to have seen, forwarded from my own business account to Derek's personal Gmail. He had been inside my business accounts for at least 14 months. He had pulled $42,000 through the operating line over 6 withdrawals, each one just under the threshold that would have triggered an automatic alert from the bank. He knew the threshold because Melissa had access to our family accountant, and Melissa had told him. Each withdrawal had a memo: equipment repair, fleet maintenance, contractor deposit. There was no equipment. There was no maintenance. There were no contractors. I put the folder back exactly as I found it. I pushed the mouse to where it had been sitting. I stood up, turned off the desk lamp, and walked out of the study. I pulled the door closed behind me at the exact same angle I had found it. Then I walked down the hall to the guest room, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the wall. I did not sleep that night. At 4 in the morning, I was still sitting there. I thought about my wife. She died of a stroke at 59, while Melissa was still young enough to need a mother and old enough that I could not do enough to compensate. I had carried that failure for 8 years. I thought maybe it had turned Melissa into someone who needed the kind of man who made her feel important by making other people feel small. I thought maybe I had let it happen because I had been too busy driving routes and managing drivers to teach her what respect looks like up close. Then I stopped thinking about what I could have done differently. I went to the kitchen. I made coffee. I sat at the table. And I started writing names and numbers in my notepad, the old way. I have a lawyer named Frank Gould who has handled my business affairs for 19 years. I called him at 6 in the morning, which I had never done before in all our years of working together, which told him everything he needed to know about the seriousness of the situation before I said a word. When I finished explaining, Frank was quiet for a long time. Roy, he said, the withdrawals alone constitute financial fraud. If he used your business accounts without explicit written authorization, that is criminal. And depending on what is in that confidentiality agreement with Patterson, we may also be looking at corporate espionage. I had not even thought about Patterson yet. I had been so focused on the money that I had not thought all the way through to why Patterson Logistics had a folder on my desk. What would a competitor want with a confidentiality agreement involving my son-in-law? I asked. Best case, Frank said. He was trying to sell them inside information. Your routes, your rates, your contracts. Worst case, he was actively helping them poach your clients while living under your roof and stealing from your operating line to fund it. The coffee tasted like burning. Frank, I said, I need to know everything. I need to know the full scope before I move. Give me 48 hours, he said. And Roy, do not tip your hand. Act normal. I hung up and sat with the silence. Outside the kitchen window, the sky was going from black to the dark blue that comes just before dawn. The yard my wife had planted was still out there, her rose bushes along the back fence. The flagstone path I had laid one summer on my knees, stone by stone, because she wanted a garden path and I wanted to give her one. She had called it her best birthday present. I thought about Melissa in that same yard as a child, chasing the dog we had then. I thought about teaching her to ride a bike in the driveway. I thought about the afternoon I sat in the car in the hospital parking lot and cried for 45 minutes before going back inside to tell her that her mother was gone, because I needed to get it out before I could be strong enough for her. I thought about all of it. Then I went upstairs, showered, and came down to make breakfast like it was a normal Friday morning after Thanksgiving. Derek came down at 10. He poured himself coffee and stood at the island scrolling his phone. He did not say good morning. He showed me his screen. 57,000 views on last night's video already, he said. The algorithm loves Thanksgiving content. You want to see the comments? No, I said. He shrugged. People love the authentic stuff. That is what I always say. Real is relatable. You should let me film you more, Roy. You have a great look for this kind of content. Rugged, you know. Classic. I looked at him over my coffee cup. He had no idea he was already finished. Sure, I said. We can talk about that. He went back to his phone. He never looked up. The 48 hours Frank had asked for felt like 48 years. I went to the office both days, which was normal. I talked to my dispatcher, reviewed the weekly run sheets, signed off on 3 new maintenance contracts. My drivers greeted me the same way they always did. Morning, Roy. Good weekend. Coffee's fresh. These were men who had worked for me for a decade, some of them longer. Men who had driven through ice storms because I told them the route was clear and they trusted me. I owed them more than they would ever know. On Sunday evening, Frank called. He had found everything. The confidentiality agreement with Patterson was for a consulting arrangement. Derek had agreed to provide them with detailed information about my top 15 client accounts, including rate sheets, renewal dates, and service complaints, in exchange for a monthly retainer of $3,000. He had been collecting that retainer for 8 months. He had given Patterson enough information to undercut my bids on 2 major contracts that I had lost in the past year, contracts I had not understood losing at the time. He had been sitting at my dinner table, eating my food, sleeping in my house, filming me for laughs, and selling my livelihood to my competitor at the same time. There is something else, Frank said. I waited. I had a conversation today with your daughter's attorney. I found out she has one because he reached out to me last week regarding an unrelated matter, and when I mentioned your name in passing, he went quiet in a way that made me ask a few more questions. My grip tightened on the phone. She has filed preliminary paperwork to pursue a conservatorship over your personal finances, Frank said. She has not filed it with the court yet, but she has the documents drafted. Her position is that you have demonstrated erratic financial decision-making and signs of early cognitive decline. The room went very still. Cognitive decline. I had replaced the roof on that house the summer before. I had renegotiated 3 major carrier contracts without counsel because I knew the numbers cold. I had driven 14,000 miles last year, checking on my regional hubs personally because I believe in showing up. Cognitive decline. She is going to try to take the business, I said. The business and the house, Frank said. The conservatorship would give her legal authority over both. And Roy, the timing lines up with the Patterson arrangement. If she controls the business, she can sell it or liquidate it. Patterson has a standing offer to acquire your route network. I found the email. I did not feel sad. I know that sounds wrong, but I did not. What I felt was something closer to recognition. The same feeling I used to get when a mechanical problem I had been hearing in the engine for a week finally announced itself clearly. The problem had been there all along. Now I just knew exactly what it was. File the criminal complaint Monday morning, I said. All of it. The fraud, the theft, the corporate espionage. I want it on record before she files anything in probate court. That will be a significant escalation, Roy. Frank, they stole from my drivers. Every dollar Derek pulled from that operating line came out of money I was moving toward benefits and bonuses. They did not steal from me. They stole from the men who drive those trucks. Silence on the line. Monday morning, Frank said. Sunday night, I packed a bag. I packed only what was mine, the things that could not be argued over in court. My wife's photographs, the original deed to the house in a fireproof sleeve, the company charter documents, my personal savings account information, which was separate from the business accounts and which neither Melissa nor Derek had any access to. I put the bag in the trunk of my truck. Monday, I went to the office at 7. I called a company-wide meeting at 8. I told my operations manager everything he needed to know to keep the company running without me for the next few weeks. He had been with me for 11 years. He did not flinch. He said, I have got it, Roy. I believed him. At 9, Frank filed the criminal complaint. At 9:15, Derek's bank received a notice from my company attorney, revoking his access to all business accounts and flagging the unauthorized withdrawals for immediate review. At 9:30, the attorney for Patterson Logistics received a certified letter informing them that we were in possession of communications, documenting their participation in what appeared to be a coordinated effort to unlawfully obtain proprietary business information, and that further action would follow unless they wished to settle the matter quietly and immediately. Patterson called Frank back within the hour. They settled by noon. At 2 in the afternoon, I drove home. I pulled into the driveway slowly. Derek's car was there. Melissa's was there. The house looked the same as it always did. The rose bushes along the back fence were dormant for winter but still rooted, still holding their ground. I sat in the truck for a moment. I thought about the man who had built this house. Not the contractor, but me, the man who had paid for it with decades of early mornings and missed weekends and long nights on the road away from his family, always telling himself that the distance was temporary, that the sacrifice was for them, that eventually the foundation would be solid enough to hold whatever came next. I had built solid. The foundation had held. The problem was what I had let move in on top of it. I got out of the truck. When I walked through the front door, Derek was on the couch with his laptop and his phone and his ring light set up in the corner. He was filming something. He looked up when I came in, and his expression shifted in a way I had learned to read by then. "Hey, Roy," he said, the easy smile. "You are home early." "I am right on time," I said. I walked into the kitchen. Melissa was at the counter on her phone. She looked up and something moved across her face. A flicker of something. Not guilt, not quite. Calculation. "Dad," she said, "you look serious. Everything okay? I need you both to sit down," I said. Derek came into the kitchen still holding his laptop. He had turned the camera toward us out of reflex. I walked over and closed the laptop with one hand, calmly, like I was closing a menu at a restaurant. "Hey, that is my..." "Sit down, Derek." The tone of my voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was the voice I use when a driver calls me from the side of the road at midnight, and I need him to focus, and I need him to listen, and I need him to understand that everything I am about to tell him is exactly how it is. That voice has never failed me. Derek sat down. I placed a folder on the kitchen table. Not the one from the study. My folder. Frank's copies. "I know about the operating line," I said. "I know about the 6 withdrawals. I know about the Patterson consulting arrangement. I know about the confidentiality agreement. I know about the monthly retainer." The color left Derek's face in stages, like a sunset in reverse. "And I know about the conservatorship paperwork," I said, looking at my daughter. Melissa set her phone face down on the counter. She did not speak. "I built this company because I wanted to leave something behind," I said. "I built it because your mother and I believed that if you work honestly and you treat people fairly and you show up when it matters, the work means something. It compounds. It becomes something real you can hand down." I looked at Derek. "You stole from that. You sat at my table and you took my money and you sold my roots to my competitor. You filmed me in my own home and put me up on the internet for strangers to laugh at. You treated me like I was a prop in your life." He opened his mouth. I kept going. "And you," I said, turning to Melissa. "You knew. Maybe not all of it, but you knew enough to go get a lawyer. You knew enough to draft papers calling your own father cognitively impaired. You signed your name to that." She looked at the table. "I did it because I was scared," she said. Her voice was thin. "Derek said the business was in trouble. He said you were making bad decisions. He said if we did not do something, we would lose everything. He told you that so you would help him take it from me," I said. "He was the one making the bad decisions. With my money. At my expense." The silence in the kitchen was the loudest I had ever heard in that house. Derek found something to say. He always does eventually. "Roy, look, I can explain the Patterson thing. It was not what it looks like. It was a consulting relationship. There was no..." "The criminal complaint was filed this morning," I said. Derek's mouth closed. "And this morning I also signed the paperwork, transferring the operating agreement back to my sole name and removing all secondary account access. Your name is not attached to anything in my company anymore. Not an email address, not a login, nothing. You cannot just..." "I own it, Derek. I have always owned it. You were a guest." I pulled a second document from the folder. It was a notice of termination of occupancy. Frank had prepared it the day before. I set it on the table. "This is a formal notice," I said. "You have 14 days to remove your personal belongings from this house." Melissa stood up. "Dad, this is my home too." "It is my house," I said. "It is in my name. It has always been in my name. I let you stay here because you are my daughter and because your mother would have wanted me to. But your mother also would have told me that love is not the same thing as allowing yourself to be stolen from. Where are we supposed to go?" "I do not know," I said. "That is the first problem in a long time that is not mine to solve." Melissa's eyes filled up. "The real ones, not the performance. And I want to be honest about what that cost me, because it cost me something. I am her father. I will always be her father. When she cried as a child, I felt it in my chest like a hand reaching in. I felt it now, too. But I also felt the $42,000. I felt the conservatorship papers. I felt Derek pointing that phone at my hands. "I am going to stay at the office apartment this week," I said. I kept a small apartment above the dispatch floor for drivers who needed to sleep over. I had not used it in years, but it was mine, and it was clean. I will be back Saturday to make sure the transition is going smoothly. By then, I expect you to have a plan. I picked up my keys. "Dad," Melissa said, "please, I am sorry. I made a mistake. I did not understand what he was doing. I was scared, and I listened to him, and I should not have." I stopped at the door. I looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen. Her mother's cabinet handles still on the lower drawers, the glass ones shaped like teardrops that she had picked out herself. The height marks on the doorframe from when Melissa was small, the pencil lines and the dates in my wife's handwriting. This whole room was a record of a life we had built together. "I believe that you were scared," I said. "I believe some of that is true. But you still signed your name, Melissa. You still laughed at the dinner table when he put that camera in my face. You still let it go on long enough for him to steal $42,000 from the men who drive for me." I paused. "When you figure out who you are without him telling you, call me. I will answer." I walked out. I drove to the office. I carried my bag up the stairs to the apartment and set it on the narrow bed and looked at the water stain on the ceiling that had been there since before I bought the building. Old and familiar, and exactly where I had left it. I sat on the edge of the bed. I called my dispatcher and told him I was in the building if he needed anything. He said the Monday runs had gone out clean and a client in Oklahoma had called to renew their quarterly contract. "Good news," I said. "Put the renewal in the calendar." I hung up and sat in the quiet. The freight yard was below me. I could hear it faintly. The sound of engines idling, the hydraulic hiss of a liftgate, the radio chatter from the dock. Sounds I had been hearing for 30 years. Sounds that had always meant something was moving, something was being delivered. Someone had trusted me to get it there. That trust was intact. The men who drove for me were still driving. The clients were still calling. The routes were still running. Derek had not been able to take that from me, because what he had not understood, what neither of them had understood, is that a business like mine is not a bank account. It is not a number on a spreadsheet that you can drain with 6 careful withdrawals. It is the sum of every handshake and every kept promise and every driver who showed up in bad weather because they knew I would show up for them. You cannot steal that. You can only lose access to it. 3 weeks later, I closed the deal to sell the Fort Worth house. I had thought about it for those 3 weeks with the same careful attention I give to any major business decision. I had weighed the reasons to keep it against the reasons to let it go. I thought about the rose bushes. I thought about the flagstone path. I thought about the height marks on the doorframe. I decided the rose bushes and the flagstone path would survive new owners better than they would survive becoming a museum I visited with grief. I decided that the best way to honor those pencil marks was not to stand in a kitchen that smelled like someone else's cooking, staring at them. The buyers were a young couple with a toddler. They walked through the house with their hands linked and the kid on the wife's hip, and I watched them through the realtor's window from the driveway, and something in me that had been tight for a long time loosened a little. I had the proceeds wired directly into a separate trust. The company was restructured under my sole name, with Frank as my legal trustee in the event of my incapacitation. The real kind. The kind that requires medical documentation rather than a daughter's signature. Everything was clean and locked and accounted for. Derek had been arrested 10 days after I filed the complaint. His bail was set at $20,000. His mother paid it. He was out, but his equipment had been confiscated as part of the investigation, which meant his channel had gone quiet. 57,000 followers staring at a blank page. Melissa had moved into a friend's spare room. She had called me twice. The first time I let it go to voicemail. The second time I answered. She talked for a long time. I listened. At the end I said, "I am not done with you, but I am done with what you became when you were with him. Call me again in a month." She cried. I waited. Then we said goodbye. The day I left for Montana, I drove myself to the yard one last time before the holidays. It was early, just past 6, and the lot was filling up with drivers heading out on morning runs. A few of them stopped to shake my hand. One of them, a man named Curtis, who had been with me for 14 years and had driven through a blizzard in Wyoming one winter to make a medical supply delivery, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You good, Roy? Better than I have been in a while?" I said. He nodded like he understood. I handed the keys to my operations manager, told him the direct line to Frank if anything urgent came up, and got in my truck. I drove north. My brother lives outside Billings. He has a ranch up there, cattle and horses and 60 acres of land that hits a mountain range at the back and goes quiet in a way that Dallas has never once been quiet in my entire life. He had been asking me to come up for years. I had always had a reason not to. Too busy. Too much running. The company needed me. Someone always needed something. I had packed light, the photographs, the deed sleeve, a bag of clothes, my notebook, and 3 pens. I had not driven long haul in years, but the highway came back to me the way an old skill does, not as a memory, but as a body knowledge. The wheel, the mirrors, the particular patience that long distances require, the way the world changes at a certain speed, all the noise falling away and only the road remaining. I drove through the Panhandle and into the plains, and then up through the high country, where the sky gets enormous and the wind comes from directions that do not have proper names. I stopped twice for coffee, and once for gas, and once just to stand beside the truck at the edge of an overlook and look at the distance. At 65 years old, I was looking at a view that did not belong to anyone. That was not owned or leveraged or contested. That was just geography. Just the earth being itself with no agenda. I thought about Derek pointing that phone at me across the Thanksgiving table. I thought about Melissa laughing. I thought about sitting alone that night at the kitchen table with cold coffee, which is where everything important in my life has always happened. I thought about the folder. I thought about Frank's voice on the phone at 6 in the morning. I thought about writing names and numbers in the notepad the old way, because some things are too important to type. I thought about all the men I had worked with who had never pointed a camera at anyone and never would. Who showed up in ice and dark and got the load where it needed to go. I thought about what my wife used to say when I asked her how she wanted to be remembered. She would say, "By the people I showed up for, not the things I owned." I got back in the truck and kept driving. When my brother opened the door of the ranch house and saw me standing there with my bag, he said, "Roy, you look tired." "I am," I said. He stepped back and let me in. The house was warm. There was something on the stove. Through the back window, I could see the mountains catching the last of the afternoon light. "How long are you staying?" he asked. I set my bag down on the floor of the front hall. I looked at the kitchen. I looked at the window. I looked at the mountains. "I will let you know," I said. He handed me a cup of coffee. Hot this time. I sat at his kitchen table, and I did not feel like a man who had lost something. I felt like a man who had finally stopped carrying something that was never his to carry in the first place. There is a difference. I know it now. Some people spend their whole lives driving routes they did not choose, hauling loads they were handed without being asked. They call it loyalty. They call it love. Sometimes it is just the habit of going where someone else needs you to go, in a direction someone else decided on, at a cost they never mention until the bill is past due. I learned to drive when I was 17. I chose every route I ever took after that. I should have remembered that lesson a long time ago. If you have ever built something with your hands and your years and then watched someone treat it like a buffet they did not have to pay for, you already understand every word of this. Hit like and subscribe to Voice of Pa. Leave a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I will read every one.